I learned something devastating about marriage 3 weeks before my wife left for Florida. Sometimes a relationship doesn't end when someone walks away. Sometimes it ends when they realize you will never leave. My name is Daniel, and until that spring, I had been married to Lauren for 9 years. We had survived layoffs, family drama, and the kind of financial struggles that force couples to either become stronger or fall apart. I believed we had become stronger. Looking back, I realize I was the only one still fighting for that version of our marriage. The conversation happened on a Thursday evening. I was standing in our kitchen making coffee for the next morning when Lauren walked in carrying her phone and smiling. She looked happy, almost excited. "I'm going to Florida next month," she said casually. I smiled back. "With your sister?" She hesitated. "No, it's a work trip." "Well, sort of." Something in my chest tightened. "Who else is going?" She placed her phone on the counter and avoided my eyes. "Ethan is going." I didn't answer immediately. Ethan wasn't just another coworker. For almost a year, he had existed in the background of our marriage like a song playing quietly in another room. Constant texts, inside jokes, work lunches that somehow turned into drinks afterward. Every time I questioned it, Lauren accused me of being insecure. "Other people are going too," she added quickly. "Who?" She paused again. "I don't know exactly." That answer told me everything. Over the next hour, our kitchen became a courtroom. Lauren defended herself. I defended our marriage. She insisted Ethan was only a friend. I asked why she smiled differently whenever his name appeared on her phone. She accused me of being controlling. I asked why she needed another man's attention so badly. Neither of us won. For the next several days, the tension followed us everywhere. We ate dinner in silence. We slept on opposite sides of the bed without touching. Sometimes I woke up in the middle of the night and saw the glow of Lauren's phone illuminating her face. One evening, I finally asked the question that had been haunting me. "Are you in love with him?" She stared at me for several seconds. "Don't be ridiculous." She never actually answered. That was the moment something changed inside me. Not because I suddenly believed she was having an affair. It was because I realized she no longer cared whether I believed it. 3 weeks before the trip, I made the hardest decision of my adult life. The following Saturday, Lauren walked into the living room carrying brochures and travel plans. She was excited. She talked about beaches, restaurants, and boat tours. She spoke as though she were discussing a dream vacation with her husband instead of a week away with another man. I listened quietly until she finished. Then I looked directly into her eyes. "If you go on this trip with Ethan," I said calmly, "our marriage is over." The room became completely silent. Lauren laughed, not because she thought I was serious, because she believed I would never leave. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't argue after making my decision. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg her to understand. I simply stood up, carried my coffee upstairs, and closed the bedroom door behind me. Lauren followed me a few minutes later. "You're giving me an ultimatum?" "No," I said. "Then, what is this?" I took a long breath. "It's a boundary. You have every right to go. And I have every right to decide what that means for me." She shook her head in disbelief. "You'd throw away 9 years over a vacation?" I looked at the woman I loved and realized she truly didn't understand what we were arguing about. "No," I said quietly. "I'd walk away because you already did." She stared at me for a long time. Then she turned around and walked out. Neither of us knew it then, but that was the last honest conversation we would ever have as husband and wife. The next morning, she booked the flight anyway and never told me directly. The weeks leading up to Lauren's departure felt like living inside a house with a slow gas leak. Nothing exploded immediately, but every conversation became harder to breathe through. We still shared the same kitchen, the same television, and the same bed, yet it felt as though an invisible wall had been built between us. Lauren never brought up my ultimatum again. Instead, she acted as though it had never happened. She talked about work, asked what I wanted for dinner, and discussed weekend errands. The only subject she avoided was Ethan and Florida. I noticed something else too. She stopped hiding her phone. At first, that seemed like a good sign. Then I realized it wasn't openness. It was confidence. She genuinely believed that no matter how uncomfortable I became, I would eventually give in and accept her decision. Maybe she was basing that belief on our history. For 9 years, I had been the one who apologized first. I was the one who compromised, who tried harder, who chose peace over pride. I had convinced myself that sacrifice was the same thing as love. Now, for the first time, I was choosing something different. About a week before the trip, I came home early from work. Lauren was sitting on the back patio, smiling at her phone. She didn't hear me open the door. "That's terrible," she laughed softly. "You're impossible." I stood there for several seconds before she looked up. "Oh," she said, quickly locking the screen. "You're home early. Who were you talking to?" She rolled her eyes. "Ethan." The honesty surprised me. "What was so funny?" "Just work stuff." I nodded slowly. "Can I see?" The warmth disappeared from her face. "Absolutely not." "Why?" "Because I don't have to prove anything to you." I remember staring at her and realizing that she was right. She didn't have to prove anything. She simply had to live with the choices she was making. 2 days before her flight, she asked if I would drive her to the airport. The question almost made me laugh. "You want me to drive you to Florida with another man?" "It's not like that." "Then, what is it like?" She opened her mouth and closed it again. "I just thought you'd support me." Support, the word echoed in my head long after she walked away. Support wasn't what she wanted. Permission was. The night before her departure, neither of us slept much. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up and found her sitting on the edge of the bed, staring into the darkness. "Lauren," she turned toward me. "What?" "Don't go." The words came out quietly, not as an order, not as a threat, just the truth. For a moment, I thought I saw uncertainty in her eyes. Then, she looked away. I already paid for everything. I almost smiled. After everything that had happened, after all the arguments and warnings and tears, that was her answer. Not that she loved me, not that I was wrong, just that she had already paid. When the alarm rang a few hours later, she got dressed without speaking. I carried her suitcase to the front door. Outside, the morning air was cold and still. She leaned forward and kissed my cheek. "I'll call you," she said. I didn't answer. She walked to the car, placed her suitcase in the trunk, and drove away without looking back. I stood in the driveway long after the car disappeared. Then I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and called a lawyer. The receptionist transferred me to an attorney named Michael. He offered me an appointment that afternoon. I accepted before I could change my mind. As soon as I hung up, I felt something unexpected. Relief, not happiness, not satisfaction, just relief. For weeks, I had been trying to save a marriage by myself. Sitting alone in that quiet kitchen, I finally understood that the marriage I was fighting for no longer existed. And for the first time since Lauren mentioned Florida, I stopped wondering whether I was making the right decision. The silence around me suddenly felt honest and deserved. The attorney's office was located on the 4th floor of a building downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early and spent most of that time staring out the window at people walking below, wondering how many of them were quietly watching their own lives fall apart. Michael turned out to be older than I expected. He had gray hair, tired eyes, and the kind of calm voice that suggested he had spent years listening to people describe the worst days of their lives. "What brings you here?" he asked. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. "My wife went on vacation with another man." The sentence sounded ridiculous when I said it aloud. Michael didn't laugh. He didn't judge me either. He simply nodded and asked me to explain everything from the beginning. So I did. I told him about Ethan. The messages. The arguments. The trip. The ultimatum. And finally, the moment Lauren drove away while fully believing I would still be waiting when she returned. When I finished, Michael folded his hands together. "Do you want to save your marriage?" he asked. It was the question everyone assumed I should be asking myself. Surprisingly, I already knew the answer. "No," I said quietly. The word hung in the room. Not because I didn't love Lauren anymore. In some ways, I still did. But I had finally accepted something painful. Loving someone doesn't obligate you to accept being treated as optional. Michael nodded. "Then let's discuss your options." For the next 2 hours, we reviewed finances, property records, bank accounts, and legal procedures. The conversation was strangely unemotional. Every document felt less like an ending and more like a confirmation of something that had already happened. When I left his office, I sat in my truck for nearly 20 minutes. Then, my phone buzzed. A message from Lauren. "Just got here. The weather is amazing." Attached was a photo. She stood on a hotel balcony wearing sunglasses and smiling into the sunlight. Looking at the picture, nobody would have guessed she had left behind a husband who had spent the afternoon planning the end of their marriage. I stared at the image for a long time. Then I put the phone away without responding. That evening, I walked through our house and began deciding what mattered enough to take with me. The process was more emotional than meeting with the lawyer. Books we'd bought together, photographs from vacations. The coffee mug Lauren had given me on our 3rd anniversary. I picked it up and remembered her laughing as she wrapped it. At the time, I thought we would grow old together. I placed the mug back in the cabinet. Some memories belong to another version of your life. The next morning, Lauren sent another message. "Pool day. Wish you were here." I almost admired the absurdity of it. She wished I were there. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not as her husband, just there, occupying the role she expected me to keep playing while she enjoyed a different version of herself. Later that afternoon, one of my friends called. "Hey," he said carefully, "are you okay?" "Why?" There was a pause. "You haven't seen the pictures?" My stomach tightened. "No," he exhaled slowly. "Maybe don't look." Of course, I looked. The first photo showed Lauren sitting beside Ethan at a beachside restaurant. The second showed them laughing on a boat. The third stopped me cold. Lauren stood beside Ethan in a white bikini. His arm was wrapped around her waist. Both of them were smiling directly at the camera. Underneath the photo, she had written 4 words: "Making unforgettable memories." I don't know how long I sat there staring at the screen. Not because I was angry, not because I was surprised, because, for the first time, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't losing my marriage. I had already lost it, and somehow Lauren still had no idea. After seeing the photo of Lauren and Ethan on the beach, something inside me went completely quiet. Not numb, not broken, just quiet. For weeks, I had been fighting reality. I had searched for explanations, excuses, and misunderstandings that would allow me to believe our marriage could still be repaired. But staring at that picture, watching my wife smile with another man while the entire world looked on, I finally stopped arguing with what was right in front of me. The strange thing was that once I accepted the truth, I stopped feeling angry. I slept better that night than I had in months. The next morning, I returned to Michael's office and signed the paperwork necessary to begin separating our finances and preparing for the legal process ahead. He reviewed each document carefully while I signed my name again and again. "Are you certain?" he asked one final time. I thought about Lauren. I thought about the arguments. I thought about standing in our bedroom and asking her not to go. "Yes," I answered. And for the first time in a long while, I actually meant it. The rest of the week became a series of quiet decisions. I rented a small apartment across town. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't even particularly nice. But it was mine. It represented something I hadn't felt in months: control over my own life. I packed my clothes first, then the books, then family photographs that belonged to me. I avoided taking anything that would create another argument later. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was an exit. Meanwhile, Lauren continued sending messages. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so painful. "Beautiful sunset tonight. Hope work isn't stressing you out. Miss you. Wish you were here." Each message arrived as though she genuinely believed everything between us remained unchanged. She never mentioned Ethan. She never mentioned the photographs. She never mentioned the fact that hundreds of people had now seen my wife vacationing with another man while I sat alone at home. I stopped replying entirely. After 2 days of silence, her messages changed. "Everything okay? Did I do something wrong? Call me when you can." For the first time all week, I sensed uncertainty. She had expected anger. She had expected an argument. What she hadn't expected was the absence of both. Silence forces people to have conversations with themselves. Sometimes those conversations are far more frightening than anything another person could say. 3 days before her return flight, I moved into the apartment. The place smelled like fresh paint and cardboard boxes. I sat on the floor that first night eating takeout from a paper container, surrounded by half-unpacked belongings. Oddly enough, I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. Not because my marriage was ending. Because I had finally stopped trying to save something the other person no longer valued. The day before Lauren returned home, I drove back to the house one final time. Walking through the rooms felt surreal. The living room where we had celebrated birthdays, the kitchen where we had spent countless evenings talking about our future, the bedroom where, just weeks earlier, I had asked her not to leave. I stood in the center of the house and realized that buildings don't hold marriages together. People do, and one person cannot carry two people's commitment forever. I placed a single envelope on the kitchen counter. On the front, I wrote her name. Inside was a short letter. No accusations, no insults, no anger, just the truth. I reminded her of our conversation before the trip. I reminded her of the boundary I had communicated. I explained that I had kept my word. Attached were copies of the lease agreement for my apartment and the documents showing that I had begun legally separating our lives. At the bottom of the letter, I wrote one final sentence. You were free to choose the trip. I was free to choose what happened next. Then I locked the front door for the last time and drove away. As I pulled onto the highway, my phone lit up. A message from Lauren. Just landed. A second message arrived moments later. Can't wait to see you. For the first time all week, I found myself wondering what expression would appear on her face when she opened the front door and discovered that I had already gone. I wasn't at the airport when Lauren landed. I wasn't sitting at home waiting for a confrontation either. Instead, I was in my new apartment, surrounded by unopened boxes and a silence that no longer felt lonely. Outside the window, the sun was beginning to set. I remember staring at the orange light on the buildings across the street and realizing that, for the first time in months, I didn't feel anxious about what would happen next. At 6:07 p.m., my phone vibrated. Just landed. Can't wait to see you. I looked at the message and set the phone back down. 30 minutes later, another message arrived. Everything okay? I didn't answer that one either. Part of me wondered what Lauren was thinking during the drive home. Maybe she was replaying her vacation. Maybe she was planning how to explain the photos. Maybe she simply expected life to continue exactly as it had before. Whatever she expected, it wasn't the truth waiting for her. Later, she described the moment she turned onto our street. My truck was gone. The garage looked emptier. Even from inside the car, she knew something was wrong. She parked in the driveway and sat there for several seconds, staring at the house. Then she grabbed her suitcase, walked to the front door, and stepped inside. The silence hit her first. No television, no music, no footsteps, just silence. Then she saw the envelope on the kitchen counter. She told me later that her hands started shaking before she even picked it up. She called my name once, then again. When nobody answered, she opened the letter. She read it once, then a second time, then a third. According to her, that was the moment she finally understood that I had meant every word I said before she left. She called me immediately. I didn't answer. She called again, and again. By midnight, she had left 12 voicemails. Some were angry, some were confused, most of them were heartbreaking. Daniel, please call me, I don't understand, we can fix this. Nothing happened with Ethan. I love you. That last one hurt the most, not because I believed it was a lie, but because I realized that love without respect eventually becomes something else entirely. The next morning, she called from a different number. This time, I answered. She was crying. Please tell me this isn't real. It's real. You left me over pictures? I closed my eyes. No, then why? Because that was the question she had never truly asked herself. Lauren, I said quietly, I didn't leave because of the pictures. She didn't speak. I left because I told you what would happen if you chose that trip, and you believed I would stay anyway. She started crying harder. Nothing happened between me and Ethan. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. By then, it no longer mattered. This stopped being about Ethan a long time ago. There was a long silence. Then she asked the question I had been expecting. Do you still love me? I looked around the apartment, at the boxes, at the empty walls, at the life I had never imagined building alone. Yes, I said honestly. Then why are you doing this? I took a deep breath. Because I finally learned that loving someone doesn't mean accepting everything they choose to do. She didn't answer. Neither of us did. In the months that followed, people asked me whether the bikini photo ended my marriage. The answer was always the same. No, the marriage ended the moment one person stopped believing the other person's feelings mattered. The photos simply revealed what had already become true. Lauren was free to make her choice. And I was free to make mine. Sometimes, the hardest part of love isn't letting someone go. It's finally accepting that they already let go of you. If this story resonated with you, remember, love requires trust, respect, and boundaries. Once those disappear, silence often says what words never could.